Today we're going to introduce you to the leadership canvas. Leadership is a huge subject, much is written about it, there are many models in the world, and I think the challenge we had was how do we start to distill that in a way that would be useful for leaders in a day-to-day basis. There are some amazing models out there. For us, some of them practically are a little too hard for people to digest on a day-to-day basis. Others are really easy to digest, but maybe they don't really do the whole subject justice. So our challenge was how do we come up with something that was easy to digest, but also something that you could use, and that's where we came up with the leadership canvas. Probably need to start by just stating that what sits at the very core of our canvas are these three words. Words that state what are leaders, what do leaders know, and what do leaders do. And actually, these are three words I have to credit to the British Army for. The British Army, everything they do around leadership, which is a lot, and obviously is really important in that environment, everything pins into these three boxes. And actually, when we did our research and looked at all the models we could and all the literature around the world on leadership, we found there wasn't really anything we couldn't pin into these three areas. So how do we then move that into the canvas? Okay, so looking at these three areas of are, know, and do. When we talk about are, I think we started to hone in on is there's probably 6 core areas of what leaders ultimately are. Well, obviously, when we talk about what leaders are, we mean great leaders and what we should be aspiring to be. And the first thing is they ultimately are accountable, which sounds, what does that really mean? I think what I mean by that is obviously they're accountable for their own jobs, but what you see in great leaders is even when they've got many people working for them that also have their own accountabilities and responsibilities, when it doesn't go right, they still ask themselves, what could I have done as a leader to ensure that didn't happen? So they have ultimate accountability, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say there. The next thing you see is that they're always capable and self-challenged. So what do we mean by that? Well, when we look at great leaders, they are clearly capable because that's why they're great. But there's very few things that bind them other than when you start to look underneath them, they always are self-challenging themselves. So they're always asking themselves, could we do it better? Is there a way to improve this? How do we do this? How do we do this next time? And it isn't a position of lack of confidence, it's just that desire to continually learn and improve how we do things, which is why you hear many great leaders say, you should always be learning, continue learning, and when you stop learning, you're done. All those kind of statements, I think, are born out of this notion of what leaders are in terms of being capable and self-challenged. We've talked about it in other videos, but ultimately leaders are the champions of the standards and behaviour. So if you want a really healthy, productive culture where everybody trusts each other and behaves in a way that we think is acceptable, the leaders have to be the champions of those standards and behaviours. If they walk past things that aren't acceptable, that's when things start to go wrong. They start to make a silent statement that it's okay to behave in a way that maybe we wouldn't want people to behave. The next part there is this notion that they're emotionally intelligent. So a big subject of EQ, emotional intelligence, for those that haven't sort of tapped into this world, I think probably the headline here is that leaders aren't necessarily highly intelligent from an IQ perspective. In fact, many leaders have quite low IQs, but what every great leader does have is high levels of EQ, which is that ability to recognise and regulate their own emotions and be able to use that for the purpose of influencing individuals that work for them. The last two things there are authentic in style and courageous and brave. And I'll start with the authentic in style. When people talk about leadership style, we relegate that to a leadership skill, because it is leadership style is just the ability to sort of flex and adapt your style depending on the situation and the person in front of you. But what you see with great leaders, they can do that and they can do it well, but they can still be true to who they are and be authentic to their own person. And that's what we would call one of the paradoxes of leadership. So, how do I flex and adapt my style but still be true to me? And it is a paradox, but great leaders seem to manage to achieve that. And then the notion of courageous and brave, we probably need to put that into context. It doesn't need to be some kind of screamy, shouty leader with a sword above your head. It just means that as a leader, there are decisions that need to be made that can be tough and challenging and that may not be good for all people, but ultimately they're good for the cause and good for the majority. And you see with great leaders, regardless of their personality, they're able to make those courageous and brave decisions. So that's what leaders are. Let's now talk into what leaders know. And I'll just position this, I think, in four boxes, which was born out of some deep research that was done, which, first of all, leaders need to know how to lead themselves. So what does that mean? It means, well, that clearly they can manage and organise themselves, but that they're very self-aware, that they know how to manage their personal brand and their impact, and all the things that would go into leading yourself. And obviously they know how to lead others, which is a fairly obvious statement in terms of leadership. But what does that mean in terms of, how do you motivate people? How do you lead teams? How do you get the best out of individuals? And all the many things we know that you would need to do in leading others. The leading the thinking part is an interesting one that I think many leaders think it's their job to be the cleverest in the room, and they think they need to be doing all the thinking, and so as a consequence they tend to take up too much space in the room. But great leaders recognise that with groups of people, if they can bring them together and bring the best out of all of them together and bring the debate and the challenge amongst the group, they can get much richer levels of thinking that are beyond their own. So that's what great leaders are able to do. And then the last one in terms of leadership skills, not for this video probably, but clearly there are hundreds and possibly thousands of skills you can identify that a leader can have. I think probably for this level, probably the thing to think about is there are some that are non-negotiable. Things, the ability to problem solve, make decisions, think strategically, will be a few. And I'd say in this modern day, the ability to coach would be probably a modern non-negotiable for leaders. But I think then it's about recognizing what are you good at and what are you not good at. And as a leader, being able to surround yourself with the people that fill the gaps that you can't fill. The final part of the canvas is what leaders do. And at the core of that, you'll see ultimately there's an outcome. So, all leaders recognize that they need to be achieving something. And it could be just a daily task, it could be, a monthly target, it could be a grand strategy, but there's always some kind of central outcome or task that ultimately we need to develop the individuals to achieve, and also recognize that they need to be parts of teams that need to be successful. But there's more to it than that. What we also need to be doing is that we also need to be defining and directing, what those outcomes are. As leaders, it's our job to give clear intent as to where we're going and what that really means. We need to be there's ensuring a plan, but I wouldn't necessarily say we should be doing the plan. Maybe that's for our people to do, but we should be ensuring there are plans there, even though plans change. Easier to adapt from a plan than to not have a plan at all. We need to over-communicate, which is a strange one that people struggle with, but I think as leaders, everything that we know and we're trying to do is running through our head on a daily basis, probably an hourly basis, and we stand in front of our people once a quarter and tell them the grand plan, and then we disappear and we continue to run that story through our head, but our people get busy in their day jobs and they forget. And then 3 months later, we wonder why nobody remembers what we said and why they're not doing what we asked them to do. So I think as a leader, if you're not over-communicating, you're probably not communicating enough. As leaders, it's really important to make people feel safe, and so the provide support bit for me is really critical. Our job is, there's enough danger from outside of our organisations, from the competition and everything else, so our job is to make sure our people know that we're there for them and that we'll support them, and when things are tough we'll look after them. So we need to do that as leaders, and you might bring in the modern day things like psychological safety into that equation as well. And then the final part of that, I think, in terms of what leaders do, is they know that nothing's perfect, so they're always learning and refining so that we can change and adapt what we're doing as we go. So there's the leadership canvas. Clearly, huge amounts of things that you can be talking about and thinking about behind each of those sections. But what I'd probably recommend you start with is just ask yourself, are you becoming more like this every day? Are you building, continue what you know? And are you disciplined to doing what you need to be doing? And then think about, where are you strong and weak on this canvas? Maybe where are your top 3 gaps, and start there as a way to start your leadership development journey.